Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com runs down the major markets. He points out the mid and small caps hit all-time highs, as did the value indices. However, the Magnificent Seven are struggling. Ross takes a look at the slide in Bitcoin, gold, silver, and copper and checks out the U.S. and Canadian dollars. CEO of InsideTrackTrading.com, Eric Hadik, examines the cycles affecting silver, gold, platinum, palladium, the stock markets, Bitcoin, the U.S. and Canadian dollars, and the energy markets, including lithium. Mining executive and editor of the New Westminster Times newspaper, David Brett, talks about the dangers facing the mining industry from UNDRIP and BC's legislation that gives Aboriginal groups veto power over virtually any project in British Columbia, and that could strip away property rights that have been held for years. We'll talk to Ross Clark right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com, where you'll find insightful market commentary and timely technical analysis. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Welcome back to This Week in Money.
It's good to be back, and we've had ourselves another week with high volatility, and we'll see what comes of this one. So right now, as far as the equity markets are concerned, the mid-cap, small-cap, and value indices are all making all-time highs again, pretty much in line with what we've been thinking. The Mag 7, the NASDAQ 100 are still not coming back very well. NASDAQ, for all that it's bounced at the end of the week, still hasn't even recovered half of its decline. The S&P is a little bit better, but still well shy of its highs. And we've got a Hindenburg signal right now, so that indicates that we've got a real mix of stocks making new highs and new lows. Clearly, liquidity is plentiful. And when I look back on these Hindenburgs, the norm would be a good hard correction in the major indices down to their 50-day moving averages. But being a Hindenburg, there's a possibility of an outright correction, a big one to the downside. So I wouldn't be too complacent at this point as far as the equity market is concerned.
What's going on with gold and silver?
Perfect move here from my perspective. We had the good high right into the end of January. Upside exhaustion readings in gold and silver, and we corrected right back down to the first of this month in both of those markets. The silver market down to its 50-day moving average, and is now starting into I would call a consolidation phase here. Got some good oversold readings right into the end of the week, and probably going to see it bounce back towards $90, I would say. Right now we're sitting around 77 on the spot price. But I think the upside move that we had to 120 plus is now an item that we cannot expect to see tested for quite a while. When you get a move like that and this kind of a break, the consolidation phase after this can be quite long, the better part of a month or two. So we'll just stand back in terms of deciding where the next direction is. On the gold market, it's sitting nicely here. Didn't break as hard as silver percentage-wise, and consolidation We're sitting around 49.60, and that wouldn't be at all surprised to see gold work its way back towards 5,200.
What's going on with copper and uranium?
Copper has pulled back just as much as the other markets did, but if we take a look at the overall play, it's holding quite well relative to the whole consolidation period that we saw in January. We did manage to pop into a new high up at 650, but not held well. And the break that we've had in the copper really has been minor, and it looks like the copper has a pretty good upside bias at this point. As far as the uranium is concerned, a hard break there on the individual stocks. And as of the end of this week, we've got springboard buys. So those are oversold in dominant uptrends, a signal that we really like. Typically, you would get a 38 to 50% retracement rally, and then build a consolidation for another move to the upside. If we take a look at the CCG, the MGA, NXE, SUUF, all of these indices, individual stocks and indices, look as though they're primed to have a pretty good recovery on the upside.
What's going on with the U.S. and Canadian dollars?
U.S. dollar bounced back reasonably well, and at this point, we've got up towards the resistance at 98. It had been oversold at 95 and change. This rally looks as though it's probably run its course right now, so I wouldn't be looking for too much more on the upside. And on the other side of the coin, the Canadian dollar has pulled probably as much here as we would expect. And I think at this point, look for the Canadian, which is around 73.55, to probably go into a consolidation phase.
What's going on with Bitcoin?
Bitcoin, as of the end of this week, we are getting some excellent downside signals. We did have those back a few months ago and got a decent rally, but at this point now, the Bitcoin is set for another good retracement rally on the upside. We're sitting at 70,000 going into the end of the week, having bottomed at 60,000. So, a 2-day reversal is really quite something. I think that at this point, you look for the 75 to 80,000 bracket is probably the top of this move right now. We do have the techniques that we use to try and identify whether this is a longer-term bottom or not. But for now, the move has yet to prove itself, so we'll just see how the bounce plays out.
What's happening on the bond market?
Bond market, looking here that there's a base starting to form. And so, we've haven't had too much on the downside in the last few months. We topped out around 119, got down to 115 or so. And the base looks as though it's starting to play out. I think that anything over 116 in the long bond, that would be the U.S. long bond futures, would be indicative of a move to the upside.
Anything happening in the crude oil market?
Crude oil has bounced, back exceptionally well from the lows that we saw at the end of the year. A little faster than we anticipated that it might do, but this is all part of a seasonal play. And if we take a look at what the investors might want here, The indices, the XEG, the XLE, and the OIH are all pushing to multi-month highs, so that clearly is a spot to be sitting and enjoying the ride.
Ross, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Good to be with you, Jim.
My guest has been Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com. Find him on X at Charts by Ross. We'll cycle into Eric Hadik next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Eric Hadik, CEO and President of InsideTrackTrading.com. He's speaking to us from Central California. Welcome back to This Week in Money.
Oh, well, thanks for having me back, Jim.
Your newsletter, Inside Track with Two Eyes, can you tell us about why it has two eyes and how our listeners can subscribe to it?
Yes, the extra eye, in addition to being a little bit of a eye catcher, is due to an acronym that I developed when I first put together the publication back in the 1990s, and each of the letters stood for one of the sectors of the market that I was following. And so you had inflation markets was the IN, which is basically your commodities in there, stock indexes being the SI, and then the second I was interest rates, and then the dollar with related currencies was the D, and E was the energy market. So it gave you that acronym of inside with the extra I in the middle. And that also gives you a very brief summary of what it is. It's a market cover, or it's a service that we offer providing technical and cyclical analysis that covers those markets, which really is, in general, most of your financial markets, at least from a broader perspective, and then within those market sectors, more specific focus on individual markets.
Silver hit all-time highs last week, over $121 an ounce, and then thud. Is silver likely to see a higher high in the spring after this correction?
That's a tough one, and that's going to hinge first and foremost on a weekly trend pattern that I use. And for each of these corrections we've seen over the last year and a half, particularly in gold, that weekly trend indicator has been what pinpointed a low and the onset of a new advance, even dating back to November of 2024, and then in May of 2025, then again in late October of 2025. Each time, gold and silver on a couple of those times produced the exact sequence that I look for when a market is correcting but not elevating that correction to an all-out downtrend. And so that's the indicator that I'm going to be watching in gold and silver in the coming weeks to see if it indicates that we've put in a major top or that there is still a retest to come. And from that broader perspective, silver came very close to fulfilling some multi-year upside targets that I've talked about. And one of them, probably the broadest analysis that factored into my work over the last year, was the uncanny 17-year cycle that has impacted so many markets, and again, so uncannily precise in a lot of those. But last April, when I did a series of reports saying that silver, platinum, and palladium were all putting in major multi-year lows in early April, and that we would see massive bull markets even back in April and May when my work was generating specific buy signals in those white metals. I was describing how 2025, 2026 would be the what I termed a golden opportunity in white metals, and also called it the platinum year from April into early 2026. All those things were written back in April of 2025, May of 2025. There's copies of them posted all over our website and across the internet, so you don't have to believe me here. You could see the documentation that detailed many of the reasons why I thought that those white metals were in store for massive rallies leading into early 2026. And that 17-year cycle that I mentioned, and that's just one of the many indicators and cycle progressions that were leading me to this conclusion. In fact, it's the broadest and most general of all those, so it was not the reason that got me shifting to the long side in those markets, but it was very intriguing to me that silver, since 1974, then again in 91, then again in 08, and it was setting up for it in 2025, had gone through similar patterns, and in 1974 and 2008, and then again in 2025, it had rallied to an initial high the year before, then gone through an approximately 6-month pullback, and then entered a massive accelerated rally of anywhere between 500% and 1,000% when you look at the 1974 and the 2008 moves from those lows. And so in April of 2025, silver was doing the same thing again. It was for the first 3 months of 2025, I explained how silver needed to spike below $28 before it would finish its correction and prepare to embark on this major rally. And it did that at the 6-month point, very similar to the 74 and 08 moves. There were other striking similarities between those two periods of time, and it was telling me to look for this major bull market in silver. All of that to say is that silver nearly reached that 500% gain threshold when it spiked up to those highs last week. And so even from that parallel in that 17-year cycle, it came pretty close to fulfilling that objective. So there's a lot of reasons to expect that a pretty significant top was put in. It also was in lockstep with this ongoing geometric 3-month, 90-degree cycle progression that I've talked about, and that had helped time previous highs in late April of last year, particularly in gold, in late July in all the metals, and in late October in all the metals. And 3 months later was late January 2026, when the highest probability for a multi-month top was set up for all of the metals. And that's exactly when you saw them peak, with gold and silver both spiking up to a very powerful convergence of monthly, weekly, and daily extreme projections. There's a specific indicator I call my LHR that on a monthly, weekly, and daily basis, they were all shooting up to the combination, the convergence of those levels as they peaked on the 28th of last week. So there was a lot of fulfillment up there and a lot of reason to expect that to be a very significant peak. And I've laid out in some more recent publications where critical support levels are and some other factors and indicators that I'm going to be watching closely here as we enter the month of February.
Gold hit all-time highs last week, over $5,600 an ounce, and then the bottom fell out. What's your gold cycle predicting from here?
Gold and all the metals are very similar, and I do see that gold has spiked down to its initial support level, which is the intra-year lows that we set in early January. Gold just spiked down to that level to start the month of February. And so that's going to be a critical support point moving forward. And I am looking at late April, early May as the next significant peak in the metals. But the really critical detail is whether that's going to be higher highs or lower highs than these late January peaks. And I hope that, and I expect that within the next couple of weeks, gold and silver and the other white metals will give a clearer indication of what to expect from that next cycle peak.
Last week, new all-time highs for platinum, over $2,800 an ounce, and palladium over $2,100 an ounce. Then they dropped. Where do you see the white metals going?
Really, it's all pretty much the same. The only distinction I would say is that when I started talking about this in April and May of last year, and then when palladium really triggered some key buy signals in mid to late May and then again in June, I was saying that I could see the bull market in palladium possibly stretching as late as the third quarter of 2026 this year. So from a broader perspective, that is still a possibility. But again, all of this is going to hinge pretty heavily on their weekly trend indicator and what that indicator does in the coming weeks as we trade through the month of February.
The Dow hit new all-time highs again this week. What are your cycles predicting for the Dow?
Well, I would, again, kind of lump that in with a lot of the other indexes, although the NASDAQ has certainly been showing more signs of weakness than the other indexes. But all of my work on an intermediate basis was telling me to look for a very significant peak in late January, early February, and in those stronger indexes. And at the same time, the NASDAQ was telling me to look for its sharpest sell-off in the early days of February, and that would probably be at least a pullback and correction in the stronger indexes. So we've entered that time frame. What I described in mid-January was my focus was on the days surrounding February 6th and 9th, this coming Friday and then the ensuing Monday, and that they would be the ideal couple of days for a sharp spike low. So all the indexes have the potential for some good selling here. The end of January started out confirming those cycle peaks, and that was a convergence of a consistent 2-month cycle progression that I talked about since last May and June, that I thought we would see a series of ascending highs in the stronger indexes in late July, late September, late November, and then finally late January. But more significant were this combination of 2-year and 4-year cycle progressions that also told me to look for a very significant peak in late January, early February, and the start of some significant selling as you phased out of that and entered early February. So we're into that time frame now, and I would just reiterate what I've also discussed since February and March of last year, is that I've seen some what I described as eerie parallels. And in fact, if you go on our other website, 40yearcycle.com, and just search eerie parallels, you can find dozens of the excerpts and items tagged with that phrase. And what I have described is that I thought the over-infatuation with Bitcoin and cryptos by many of these tech companies was going to ultimately create a big problem for them, and that there were some eerie parallels, not exactly the same, and perhaps not to the same extent, but still parallels to the shell companies in the 1920s and to the dot-com bubble of the 1990s, where you had certain derivatives that the market was already in a good bull market, but then greed took over and you started to get these derivatives created, or in the case of the dot-com, a lot of businesses on paper that had no earnings and even no viable product, some of them, and they drove the last phases of those bull markets into parabolic peaks, and then you saw the ramifications of that rampant speculation. And I've said since last year that I thought cryptos were a very similar parallel, and that my work was showing the fourth quarter of 2025 was when cryptos would peak and turn down, and then once stock indexes had gotten through their late January time period, you would enter a very dangerous period for both of them, when Bitcoin and cryptos would likely see their most prolific sell-off, and that you would see it start to filter into some of these tech companies. Of course, the one that's been leading the pack there is Strategy, that they've gone from a software company to being a massive Bitcoin holder. And then a lot of other companies, tech companies, have followed suit, just not to the same extent. And so you could have one of these things where you start to get a domino effect, and it doesn't matter whether in some of those companies Bitcoin is just a minor factor that's going to weigh on their earnings for a quarter or two, but the overreaction is what you always get in a market like this. So this time frame, starting in late January, early February, and stretching into when Bitcoin cycles bottom a little bit farther out in this year, to me, it's going to be a very dangerous time in, particularly in the tech stocks and the NASDAQ 100. So that's why I've thought we would see this initial plunge into February 6th or 9th. So this week is certainly a precarious one for that. And I don't think the other indexes are going to escape the impact of that. But they're not in as negative of a setup just yet. Of course, that could all change quickly, but for right now, it's the NASDAQ 100 that has been going through a whole topping process. I've described it to my readers. One of the things is this weekly 21 MAC indicator that I use, and the NASDAQ 100 has been tracing out a perfect topping sequence. And since early January, I've told my readers to watch the first 2 weeks of February as the most vulnerable time because of how that indicator is set up. It can tell you in advance when the indicator is more likely to turn and when the corresponding market action is more likely to accelerate, in this case, to the downside.
Dow Jones transports hitting new all-time highs again this week. Where are the transports in their cycle?
The transports are a little better constructed or a little more constructive in their technical pattern right now, but all of these markets, all of the indexes are still focused on that late January, early February time for peak and reversal lower.
The U.S. dollar had a significant pullback as gold topped. Since then, it's been moving higher. Are the cycles looking bullish for the greenback?
I don't know that I would call them bullish. I think on an intermediate basis, we could see some recovery, but there are some more significant and longer-term cycles out on the horizon that I think could still and should still weigh on the dollar leading into them. And so, again, I think that you could see a rebound here in the first part of the year, but unless the weekly trend turns up in the dollar index, so there again you have that indicator being such a key, unless that turns up, I'd be looking for another sell-off to follow this current bounce.
The Canadian dollar had a spike higher last week and has since pulled back. Where is the Canuck buck in its cycle?
I would just really discuss some of the key technical indicators that are coming into play there, and the Canadian dollar, at least the March futures, which is what I am watching right now, have their best support around 72.50 to 72.70, and so that's the level I'm watching as kind of make or break support. I'm more inclined to think that level will hold and we'll see another wave higher, but that's really the deciding point for me.
Bitcoin dropping to levels not seen since late 2024. Does Bitcoin look like it's in trouble?
Absolutely. And again, I keep repeating that since October of last year. And back then I explained to my readers how the first drop should see it plunge from its peak around 125,000 down to 80,000 leading into mid-November. Then we would see a bounce. 97,000 was what I had targeted as the rebound level, and then it would be set for the bottom to fall out. And so I still think that is the case, and I think this first week of February is going to be a very difficult one for Bitcoin. And, you know, as we're breaking below that 75,000 level, there are two other primary downside targets that I have discussed that I think we could still see before the middle of the year. And I still believe that is going to have an impact on certain leading stocks, and then we'll see if if those couple of dominoes falling starts a whole sequence of dominoes falling. But I do think that Bitcoin here in the opening days of February is in its most vulnerable time, and I've explained why I thought that its decline would extend into the week of February 9th to the 13th, next week, and we would see some accelerated selling leading into that. So the remaining days of this week are on tap for that. And I just think that you're getting at least on a 1 to 2 year basis, you're getting a bubble that's bursting, and those types of moves always overshoot to the downside their equilibrium point, just as they overshoot to the upside their true value. So I still am looking for this accelerated move in the first 5 to 7 trading days of February, and that goes along with what I repeatedly point out to my readers, the 90-10 rule of cycles, and it basically just shows how you have a lot of parabolic moves where often 80 to 90% of a move within a specific cycle occurs during the final 10 to 20% of that cycle. And so that's part of the reason why I've been thinking that the opening days of February would be a very vulnerable time for cryptos.
Light crude oil has been moving higher in 2026. Is the light crude cycle looking bullish?
I'm not sure if I'd yet term it bullish, but we certainly had a myriad of different cycles and cycle progressions looking for a low in late December, early January, a low that should hold for at least a few months. And at the time, my work was showing that we should see a rally into at least the first half of February, possibly stretching into March. So within that context, I think the energy markets are still constructive, but the upside potential for that is just really starting to take more specific form, and that's going to dictate how bullish I am over the coming weeks.
Natural gas has seen significant volatility so far this year. Where is natural gas in its cycle?
Natural gas is also in a rally mode in the first month and a half of the year, possibly stretching into March, April. It's based on a lot of related timing indicators, and there are some cycle progressions that reinforce that out in March and April. So it's, again, in a constructive context. I think it's going to continue with the volatility. You're going to see some wild swings in both directions, but that it could see some higher levels as we get out towards the end of the first quarter. It initially surged into late January and retested 6 to 9 month highs, and so that's the first critical level of resistance, up around 440 in the March futures, 440 to 450. That's the first level that needs to be exceeded to elevate this rebound and show that it's more than just a couple week sharp reaction to the upside.
What's the latest on the agricultural cycles?
That would depend on which ags you're looking at, but your grain markets are They've been hovering near their lows. They're a little bit mixed from the perspective of soybeans, corn, wheat. Corn right now is the weaker of the bunch. Wheat is going through a bottoming process and has begun an upside sequence on that 21 MAC indicator I was just referring to in my NASDAQ 100 analysis. From the reverse perspective, the inverse perspective, wheat has been tracing out part of that, but has not yet given the key signals to say that a bottom is intact. So they're still pretty weak and needing more constructive movement before I would start to turn a little bit bullish on grains.
LIT, the lithium ETF, continues to move higher. Any cycle thoughts for LIT?
I would just say the same thing that I've said about it in all of our discussions, that LIT is it's an ETF. It's lithium stocks, and it is more in sync with overall stock market cycles and movement than it is with overall lithium movement. The LIT was edging up along with the stock market since April, May of last year, and similar to the stock indexes, late January is a key time for that LIT ETF, and you could see a multi-week or possibly multi-month top put in right there in the late January period. And so I expect it to continue moving far more like a stock than like the lithium commodity itself, although lithium obviously had its own surge there in the final months of last year after trading between about 8 and 10 for 9 or 10 months there. It finally broke out following the lead of LIT. So it's just, I would say that I'm more watching it in terms of its stock value and stock correlation than anything else.
Where can our listeners subscribe to Inside Track, spelled with 2 I's?
They can do that at our primary website, InsideTrackTrading.com. And as you said, that's inside with the 2 I's, so it's INSIIDE, TrackTrading.com.
Eric, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Thanks for having me back, Jim.
My guest has been Eric Hadik, CEO and President of InsideTrackTrading.com. Coming up, David Brett, next on This Week in Money.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is David Brett, founder of the New Westminster Times, online at newwesttimes.com, on YouTube at the New Westminster Times, on X at New West Times. David is president, CEO, and a director of Pacific Bay Minerals, a publicly traded company online at pacificbayminerals.com. David, welcome to This Week in Money.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me.
How are things at the New Westminster Times and Pacific Bay Minerals?
Well, things at the New Westminster Times are going well. We launched the online publication in 2022, kind of with a view to provide an alternative to the mainstream media take on things in the Royal City, but also to look at, issues impacting the province of BC and beyond, and taking a more independent look at all of the crucial issues of the day. So there's a lot of crucial issues in British Columbia right now, so we've been very busy talking about those things. Things are going well at the New West Times. Things are growing. At Pacific Bay Minerals, we have a couple of projects in British Columbia, one way up north near Cassiar called the Haskins Reed Project. It's a critical minerals project right on Highway 37. But, folks should know that I wear kind of two hats. I have my journalist hat and I'm also a mining guy from way back, a long experience in the mining industry, particularly in British Columbia, but also in other parts of the world and South America and the USA. So I've got a keen eye for the mining industry and following closely developments, particularly with mining laws, land use planning, and all of the controversial issues springing up in relation to the Cowichan case and the UNDRIP legislation. So lately I've been able to kind of combine my journalistic perspectives with my mining perspectives, have become very much in sharp focus lately.
Mm-hmm. Now, first to the markets, gold and silver had massive run-ups in price, followed by significant drops the last week or so. Are these gold and silver moves likely the canary in the coal mine, indicating strong mining markets ahead?
Well, if you ask a promoter that question, you're always going to say yes, it's all bullish. But in all seriousness, I do think we're heading into kind of a golden age of the mining industry. The price of gold, we had what's called the AMEBC Roundup last week, the big West Coast exploration mining conference, and people were looking at their phones as the conference wore on and looking at the gold price, and just mouths were dropping at these leaps. And then, of course, at the end of the week, we had this, jaw-dropping plunge. So the volatility has been incredible. But simultaneous with the gold move, you've also had very strong moves in the price of copper, trading frequently north of $6 a pound and looking like it's going to go higher. So this has fueled great interest in British Columbia, the critical, quote-unquote, critical minerals projects, and maybe we could talk about that. Has it become a bit of a buzzword, critical minerals? Really, we're talking about copper as the primary critical mineral that sort of fits into that category. So there's I think we're in a period where finally, I think the mineral exploration and mining industry is going to come back into the focus for investors after a fairly long period of just kind of floating around in the background while cryptocurrencies and artificial intelligence and other hot sectors have dominated, the talking points of the market. We're moving back into a period when people have a lot more interest.
Now, it's interesting. I just saw an article that said Pandora is now going to plate their items with platinum because it's cheaper than using silver. Is that an incredible turnaround in what's happening with minerals? Is that a sign of the times?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a paradigm shift happening. It's hard, for us in the industry sometimes to see what's going on. Something happened a few months ago. I was I live in Westminster, obviously, but I went to Metrotown Mall, and there is a currency and bullion exchange there. And I was just blown away by the size of the lineup. I'd never seen anything like it. There was 100 people lined up outside. So this was before this kind of really strong move. So I think people have suddenly become interested in silver, and people were lining up to buy it. So when you see the Main Street, average people suddenly becoming tremendously interested in acquiring precious metals like silver, I think it signifies a shift, and that the bullish move in silver and gold is likely to sustain. That's my opinion.
Last week, you were at the Mining Association of BC's Roundup Conference. We'll get to BC in a minute. Was there overall excitement at that mining conference about the markets coming back?
Well, I tried to keep my finger on the pulse of the feeling of the market, and this was kind of my general observation, is that there's still a bit of a disconnect between the metals prices and the dramatic moves and the feeling amongst the junior companies, and that is what used to be called the BC Yukon Chamber of Mines Roundup, is mainly about junior companies and suppliers to the exploration industry. I wouldn't say that people were popping champagne corks. People were still, realizing they have to work fairly hard to raise capital. So what I think this means is that the kind of bullishness in the junior company sector has not really been realized yet. So often, in my experience over the years, you see these dramatic moves in the metals, and then it's almost an immediate impact on junior markets. But it's still that impact, that sort of whipsaw effect, has not really been fully realized. A lot of the capital is flowing into the much larger capitalized companies that have either operations that are running or they're very advanced projects. But the junior the earlier stage projects are still having to work pretty hard to raise money. So I think to me that signifies that there remains upside in the junior space for people to hunt around and find good companies to invest in.
You can find all this information on the internet. This is from the Brave.com AI search. Canada signed on to UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, in 2021. In November of 2019, BC enshrined UNDRIP with DRIPA, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, into provincial law. The UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and UNDRIP are interconnected frameworks guiding reconciliation and sustainable development in Canada, particularly in BC. Adopted in 2015, remember this date. In 2019, the WEF and the UN signed a strategic partnership framework to strengthen collaboration in areas such as climate change, digital cooperation, gender equality, and financing the 2030 Agenda. David Eby, the Premier of BC, has been associated with the World Economic Forum through its Young Global Leaders program, which he completed in 2015. He served as a member of the WEF's Global Futures Council on Cities and Urbanization from 2016 to 2018. Eby's been listed on the WEF website as a contributor and a member of the Global Leadership Fellows Program. There are allegations that an advisor to Eby is linked to the Canada Committee 100 Society, a group identified as a CCP front organization. A side note, former BC Premiers John Horgan, rest in peace, and Christy Clark have their own pages on the World Economic Forum website, weforum.org. David Eby, with his international connections, just referred to Alberta independence people talking to U.S. officials as treasonous. Could these connections to international organizations explain why mining continues to be frowned upon in BC?
Well, just to speak about DRIP, I've been commenting on this quite a bit through our YouTube channel. There's no question that what happened with the writing of the UN Declaration into the laws of BC has had unintended consequences. Let's keep in mind that the vote on that matter was unanimous. It wasn't just the NDP. It was also the BC Liberal Party at the time, which is the right-leaning party. So I think now it's coming to light that there was a plan, effectively a series of unintended or unenvisaged consequences, I think, that to some degree excuses the right of center voters who kind of thought it was just a kind of a feel-good acknowledgement of Indigenous people, and that the obvious reality, we need to treat them with respect. And as someone in the mining industry who has engaged with First Nations people across the province of BC for decades, when I read UNDRIP, I said, well, we're already doing that. There's a lot of extensive consultation. You can't just get a permit to do things in BC without consultation with the local First Nations, and we've been doing this for years. Why wouldn't we? It's because a lot of the mining projects are in the hinterlands where there's no large towns. The local population is key to the development of these mining projects and exploration and things. But as to the UN and their role in kind of driving something, my message to people is somewhat to invert that paradigm. And people find this somewhat mind-blowing, that what if Vancouver, the center of mining globally, is controlling the United Nations and not the other way around? Let's not forget that one of the most influential organizations in the latter half of the 20th century was Greenpeace. The radical environmental agenda, which started out, stopping the nukes and saving the whales, turned into this radically anti-capitalist movement that is taken the world by storm. Well, that was formed in Vancouver by a ragtag group of folks in a church basement. And they got a ship and they went out and they transformed the way activism happens globally. So it is no small thing that the BC NDP and the kind of radical environmentalist agenda is very much a part of the BC NDP base. And those folks that have these radical ideas, such as the West Coast Environmental Law, this law firm that really brought a lawsuit against the government regarding the mineral tenure system, for example. It's a complete disaster. The NDP has brought in a series of rules about staking a claim. And, what I'll say is that the absolute foundation, what this has in common with, say, the Cowsman decision, private property rights, and encroachments on land use policy throughout BC, has in common with the mining industry is it's about access to land. And the foundational concept that when you have a claim to land, it's absolute. So the foundation of mining is the ability to acquire tenure. In other words, the mineral rights. So heretofore, up until a few years ago, it was understood that if you staked a mineral claim in British Columbia, you owned 100% of the subsurface mineral rights. Now that's in question. Because in order to be granted a mineral claim, you have to go through a consultation process with First Nations. And it's turned out that this new system was put in place last year, and it's looking like the system is crashing and burning because they can't process all of the applications because the First Nations don't have the capacity to do it. So what this means is that the foundation, say for building a mine, there's a lot of big mines in BC that are on deck to go into production. And the David Eby government is sort of trumpeting mining as the salvation of the province to fight back against Trump's tariffs. And we're going to usher in this golden age of mining in BC. Well, meanwhile, he's pulling the rug out from under that industry by making it more difficult and making the permitting process more difficult by handing a veto to First Nations. So this is all very undemocratic, and I think the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People was never meant to be part of a set of laws. It is a sort of a set of guidelines and principles for how Indigenous people should be treated. So, true to form, BC is a very radical place and always has been, and here we are with a very radical, you're quite right, I think people have underestimated the degree of radicalization that this fellow David Eby has. He's an activist lawyer, that's how he cut his teeth, working for the Pivot Legal Society. So, as to the larger global plan, of what is happening with UNDRIP, I have not really focused on that. I'm trying to focus on what we can see directly in front of us, and litigation, things that are before the courts, stories that are happening and playing out right away. So there's a lot of, I think, what's happening in BC. The BC public have not really woken up to what's going on, and there's somewhat like, there's the analogy of the frog in the pot. The frog does not realize he's in any jeopardy from the boiling water until it's too late. So we have a kind of a public that is now waking up because of the Cowichan case. They're thinking, what? My private property, my indefeasible title is now defeasible, potentially? People are freaking out about that. But is it too late? I think it's really important that people start to seriously question what is going on in this province and pay more attention. There's a lot of people who are very sort of activated in their becoming very, very aware. But I would say my feeling is that the majority of voters are still somewhat, I will worry about it later. So I think the time to be worried is now, and people need to sort of become more knowledgeable and educated about what's happening.
Have permitting and authorizations in BC become a long, drawn-out bureaucratic process for exploration development projects operating mines and smelters?
This has been a major problem in BC over the last several years. It used to be that, let's say, a company acquires a mineral tenure, the geologist map out a plan for, exploring an area with potential. And it leads to drilling. You apply for a permit, and 2, 3, 4 months to get a permit. It was common. Now, it's not uncommon to people talk about 12 months, 18 months, 2 years to get a permit. And at the Roundup conference last week, Eby gave an opening address to the assembled crowd where he pledged, made a promise to speed up the permitting process from between 40 days, and I think it was 120 days. So he's made a promise to radically speed up the process of permitting. Plus, he was trumpeting the approval of the expansion of a major mine in northern BC, but it wasn't a new mine, the Mount Milligan mine. It was an existing mine. So it was almost as if he was taking credit for not shutting it down. If you think about the communication spin, this is something that, with my journalist hat on, constantly criticizing and looking critically at the way in which news is couched and the angle on the story. So his angle on the story was, look at what we did. We rapidly approved the expansion of this mine. The way I would see it is, well, it's not a new mine. You're just allowing it to continue by allowing it to access other areas in the ore body. So he's thinking of it that as a big feather in his cap, but I don't see it that way. So I see what I foresee is a lot of these major, massive mines in northwestern part of the province facing significant challenges in getting approved, not necessarily because of the environmental process, but because of the First Nations veto, effectively, that EB has handed over. We've just seen a case where a company called Skeena Resources signed a multi-billion-dollar deal with the Tahltan First Nation, $1.7 billion in direct benefits over the life of the mine, plus a $40 million upfront payment to cash out members of the band $10,000 a pop. This has raised eyebrows in the industry. It's like, who can afford that? What junior company, what mid-sized company can afford to write a check for $40 million so that each band member can, if you've got a couple of folks in a household, that's $20,000. Let's say if you got 5 folks in a household, they could be depositing, airlifting $50,000 into the households of some of the Tahltan folks. So this has become a bone of contention. What's next? Or what about the next big mine? So there's this great cloud of uncertainty that has grown up around DRIPA, the Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, and what it really means, and what free, prior, and informed consent means. The interpretation of that wording that EB is applying is basically a veto. If they don't approve, it's not happening. 2 years ago, that was not the case. Because I'm in this industry, I happen to know, on very good authority, that First Nations have never had a veto over any project, period. That has been the law. That has changed. EB and his administration have said, no, if they don't sign off, it's a no-go. So what this leads to is potentially massive amounts of money in the billions and billions of dollars flowing to First Nations. And that is just a transfer of wealth from corporations and taxpayers to semi-democratic organizations throughout the province. And there's implications to that I don't think people fully appreciate. But nevertheless, folks in the industry in BC have high hopes that all of this can be muddled through, and the high and escalating price of metals can be leveraged to the benefit of all the folks here in BC with jobs, and companies can, barrel ahead with their production plans and access the capital. One of the big newsy items that's happening in BC right now is the merger of Teck with Anglo American. I spoke with folks at the Roundup with Anglo, and they said that this deal, mega merger, is expected to close in about 12 months. So as part of the Government of Canada's sign-off on that, they have they've required the merged entity to spend like $3.5 billion in British Columbia. So they told me, you got to spend this money. So they've kind of got a gun to their head to spend the money, but that kind of plays into the EB, let's hand the province over to First Nations plan. I mean, look what happened with Hadik.Market. With the stroke of a pen, it's almost like it's no longer part of British Columbia. But I'll stop there.
Would it be fair to say there are powers that want to see the destruction of the BC mining industry?
Yes, I did a video about this. I call it eco-fascism. And I didn't invent this term. This term was invented by one of the founders of Greenpeace, a fellow named Bob Hunter. He was a respected columnist with the Vancouver Sun. And he wrote in a 1971 article, it was a centennial issue of the Vancouver Sun. BC was 100 years old. He sort of predicted a future of a near communist state. This is he used the word. He said, not even the communist countries have attempted the level of control that will be required, and that the concept of private property would be a thing of the past. It has to be seen to be believed. He actually said this. And then he went on a few months after penning this article to sail off into the Alaskan Panhandle to confront the above-ground nuclear testing. And they were incredibly successful as an organization, and they skyrocketed to international prominence and collecting hundreds of millions of dollars. And this guy was really kind of the genius behind the PR plan. So he came up with this expression of eco-fascism. And he shared that with a fellow that I respect a lot. His name is Dr. Patrick Moore, a co-founder of Greenpeace, who left the organization in the mid-'80s because he felt it had become unscientific. And it was more or less a tool of anti-capitalism more than anything. It was more like, well, let's stand with the Sandinistas, and he said people wearing berets and Che Guevara T-shirts. Well, what does that have to do with saving the whales and stopping the nukes? And so yeah, I think this is something that people don't quite appreciate, is that the environmental activist movement are not interested in responsible mining or environmentally friendly resource extraction. They're in favor of no resource extraction. They want to end it. No pipelines, no oil industry, no oil infrastructure, no mining, no forestry. That's their kind of nirvana state. So this environmental activist movement is part of the machinery that has caused the NDP government to be so prominent in BC. I mean, it is a rather anomalous situation. You have a complete collapse of the NDP federally. They're not even an official party anymore, but they have an ironclad grip over the province of BC. It's because of the environmental movement. This is where it was birthed and born, and there's a lot of people in this province, God bless them for their dedication to their cause. But a lot of them are behind the scenes, moving against and pulling strings, and the average member of the public doesn't quite get it. I mean, AB's talking about job creation so he's now in a position where, well, his excuse, I don't want to run out of time here, but I think this is important for people to understand. The messaging around mining in BC is all about critical minerals. Critical minerals. No one talks about gold. Most of the mines are gold mines, but they say critical minerals. Well, why are they saying that? Because it is the greenification of mining. It is sort of an environmental excuse. They say, well, we need the copper to drive the transformation of the green economy. So we need to electrify the planet. We're going to need a lot of copper to do that. So suddenly mining is now an environmentally friendly enterprise. I don't think that's how the activists really see that. So he might run into headwinds from the activist movement. Hey, what are you doing? And then he's got don't worry about it. This is all to help First Nations. So he's threading all these needles. Okay, we're handing the cash, all of the huge multi-billion-dollar benefits to First Nations. So it's part of reconciliation. Hey, don't worry about it. So all these dynamics are playing out in BC right now, and it's a very high-stakes game. And it's not just BC. It's these kind of narratives are happening around the world.
Would it be fair to say that BC is currently the worst province or territory for mining in Canada?
Well, I would say there's other jurisdictions that have similar problems. The province of Quebec used to be the numero uno place in the world. According to, the Fraser Institute comes out with these rankings, global rankings of jurisdictions for mining, and Quebec was number one. But they quickly dropped out of favor when they put a moratorium on uranium exploration and mining in the province. This was part of, so even though I have experience in that, my company was part of investment, $5 million exploring uranium in Quebec. It was going to be like Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is a major producer of uranium, and it is this feeds into the environmental activist playbook. And one thing that Dr. Patrick Moore had a falling out with Greenpeace over is he said, well, wait a minute. We want to reduce air pollution. Well, nuclear is the way to go because there's virtually no air pollution that comes out of it. So why are they against nuclear? So Quebec is also mired in these problems. So there's all kinds of jurisdictions all over the world that are much, much worse than BC, believe it or not. There's places in Argentina where the government would say, oh, well, we're banning open pit mining. We're banning this. We're banning that. They're introducing these policies. So a lot of very formerly favorable areas of the world. So I guess what I'm saying is that this kind of woke dogma and approach to public policy around mining, BC doesn't have a monopoly on that. And I think there's enough smart people in the mining industry to push back hard enough to kind of straighten out the government. And they're BC. The reason ultimately I'm more optimistic about BC than it may sound is that we really have no choice. Forestry is suffering because of the tariffs, and the province needs a kind of optimistic way to develop in the north. And there's EB or not, there's no way to stop this juggernaut in BC. Mining is going to proceed, and I think there's going to have to be a lot of backing off of the agenda. But yeah, there are places I've worked in the world that are much worse. Things like corruption. That's not something that I have observed in BC. The civil servants who work in the mining industry are good people. I mean, not every bureaucrat is great or great at their job, but we shouldn't be blaming the people who are trying to do their jobs. But in some jurisdictions in the world, it's there's this inherent corruption in the governments that fortunately in Canada because we have a country of laws and the rule of law, we're pushing back on that. But it's not to say that we shouldn't shine a spotlight on potential corruption. And this is the underlying message I have to people is that, well, look at the potential for corruption. You don't want to have any situation where people could be motivated and the incentives so structured that the taxpayers and those who have voted for these governments to go in are going to find out later that money was misspent, misallocated, and the incentives are all wrong. So, yeah, there are worse places in the world to do business, and notwithstanding my criticism of the government, I still think this is a gangbusters place to do business in the world for mining, because we have mining people. It's not just about the resources in the ground. It's about the skills and talents of the people in the industry. And Vancouver should be very proud of the sort of legacy of mining expertise that we have. It's legendary around the world. And that legacy, I think, hopefully will grow. We're being given a run for our money by the Australians. There's a potential for Vancouver to be overshadowed by Australia. But this is a message. People, this should light a fire under people in the mining industry in BC to, fight harder for the industry here.
You've been following and interviewing Dallas Brody, the leader of the new BC political party, One BC, on your YouTube channel, The New Westminster Times. As Premier, do you think Dallas could turn BC into a very prosperous mining powerhouse?
Well, we have a strange paradox occurring in British Columbia politics right now. The Dallas Brody has an ability to galvanize people, and she speaks frankly and plainly about, BC history and the need for British Columbia to be proud of its past and not be ashamed, and to push back particularly on the Kamloops 215 child graves narrative, which has not been ground truth, and that this narrative of a genocidal colonial, fascistic government, trampling, genociding Indigenous people, is that really at the heart of the problem. She's speaking directly to that, and I think she really resonates with huge numbers of people. But yet she was booted right on out of the party. So when it comes to the BC political scene right now, and there's a big leadership race going on with the BC, the Conservative Party, it's really a battle between wokeness and those who are not woke. And this is a big problem for those who are right of center. There's this fear of speaking directly about socially controversial issues, as if that's going to taint their leadership and cost them the election. Well, Dallas Brody is one of the only ones who's taking the opposite approach. Is no, you have to talk about these issues in a blunt, frank, and forthright manner. She's done that, and just endured an incredible amount of abuse. So in my interview with her that's on her YouTube channel, I asked her straight up, if there was a move to recruit you to run for leadership of the Conservative Party of BC, would you do it? She said, yes. Will that happen? Nobody knows. But I think she is a kind of a charismatic person that has a very strong message. And it is, frankly, to me, very weird that things have ended up this way with the Conservative Party of BC, where, you had a leader, John Rustad, who it's kind of an interesting coincidence that John Rustad was also kicked out of the BC Liberal Party for why? For retweeting the man I was just describing earlier, Dr. Patrick Moore, who's now been labeled as a climate denialist. And how dare you? Well, how could you support this kind of climate denialist and be associated with his, quote, climate denialism? So he was thrown out of the party. And then he used that as an impetus to grow this huge movement. Now he's been tossed out. So it's a very strange situation where the people who seem to galvanize the voters are kind of pushed out in this pursuit of this centrist, middle-of-the-road policy and this idea that, well, we have to be really middle and right down the middle in order to win, rather than we need to have strong principles that we align on and we do not waver from and we're committed to. So Dallas kind of symbolizes that movement to say, no, these are our beliefs. We don't care what the abuse that comes at us or all of the name-calling, being smeared as a racist or a residential school denialist or all these things. We were with the Dallas, people can see on our YouTube channel, out at UBC, where there was a near riot because she was standing there with Francis Widdowson and Jim McMurtry. And they're just talking about the Kamloops Graves thing. The level of violence that was directed at her was just shocking. It was, to say it was over the top is the understatement of the world. It was so kind of, there was so much energy put into opposing her, and it was very strange to see the sort of pro-Palestine people with their keffiyehs in the crowd, kind of being the most prominently visible. Like, why is it the indigenous movement has got what I call the pro-Hamas organizers, and there was people from the terrorist organization Samadoun that were there. So you have this weird situation in BC where Dallas Brody is coming across as the voice of the people, but she's been sidelined. I don't know how long that can last. So that's my comment about Dallas. She should be listened to and followed, and it's going to be an interesting situation with the leadership race here over the next couple of months.
Do you agree with the expressed opinion that BC Premier David Eby wants to give all the land in BC to the Native Indians and refuse to have the province's lawyers properly defend the people of BC in a lengthy court case that ruled in favor of the Native Indians? Does this add significant risk to mining companies wanting to do business in BC?
It does. We have kind of a double whammy that's hit not just the mining industry, and it also impacts all industry. So in the Cowichan decision, which is a patch of ground in Richmond, BC, right on the Fraser River, where I think it has been firmly established that the Cowichan did indeed have a fishing village, that is not in question. What's in question is that the grant of fee simple interest in the lands in that area can coexist or be annulled by the granting of Aboriginal title. So we're talking about billions of dollars worth of real estate now. This land is not just, farmers' fields. You've got the YVR fuel facility. You've got an Amazon warehouse. You've got massive brand new warehouse capacity. You've got a port facility. You've got, you also have individual homes. Some of them are palatial mansions. You've got a golf course. All impacted by this. So what's happened? So the risk factor for the mining industry is that the EB government has handed a veto over all projects to the First Nation. That has now become quite evident. This introduces a unknown risk factor for mining because it's unknown how much it will cost in financial benefits or project percentage benefits to proceed. Nobody knows now what it's going to cost any company to develop a mine here because of this veto. So you have the potential for, let's say, an industrial project, a port project, expansion of a warehouse facility anywhere is now, whereas, this time last year, the lawyers wouldn't be doing a deep dive on all of the land claims that are potentially coming towards their project. They're suddenly looking at, here's a big question mark. What are the risk factors involved in, say, building a condo tower? What if the courts should decide that Aboriginal title might be applicable? Now, I'm not in the camp that's said everyone should light their hair on fire and think that every patch of earth in BC is subject to a Aboriginal title. Aboriginal title is very, very, very difficult to establish because there's all this court jurisprudence that has preceded it where, look at the Couch had to go fight in court for 10 years to establish that this small patch of ground there in Richmond should have been theirs. It should have been set aside for them 150 years ago. The courts, the bar of, there's all kinds of different bars. However, the decision has a kind of an unintended little feature in it that has an impact on BC's land title decision and the implications for private property. So there's all kinds of the cases being appealed. EB is saying, there's no way that private property is affected by this. We're never going to tolerate that. Private property is secured. Don't worry about it. Well, people are worried about it. Lots of people are worried about it. So this worry factor obviously affects business. Business thrives on certainty. And this is another talking point of even, we want certainty. Hey, everybody, let's get to certainty. Well, him getting to certainty is often involves just simply caving in. And this gets back to your question about these litigation directives that have come down from the federal government and the provincial government to somewhat pull the punches of the government and not fight against extinguishment of Aboriginal title upon grant of fee simple title. So the government's lawyers are saying, no, that'll never work. It's been tried and failed. But the city of Richmond has come out and said, no, hey, that should be the standard. That should be the rule. If the Crown grants interest in fee simple over land, it should be 100% indefeasible, period. Nothing, save an earthquake or the land, just flowing into the sea, should take it away. So we have this kind of stalemate going on in BC where the governments are basically saying to the people, we're not going to argue that. So this has become a big conundrum and a battle royale across the province. And the problem is that the appeals process is going to take 5-10 years. So in the meantime, there's a lot of water going to flow under the bridge.
Due to ongoing changes to the Mineral Titles Act, are local miners looking to friendlier jurisdictions outside of British Columbia?
It's too early to tell because the new mineral tenure system that came into force last March, March of 2025, is still in its testing phases, but the early indications are not good. The way the system used to work is you went on to a platform called Mineral Titles Online. All you needed is what's called a free miner's certificate. For individuals, it's like $25 or $50, I think now. And companies have to pay $500 to get it. And you find where you want to stake, and it's all on a grid system. It's tied into GPS, and you click, and instantaneously you own 100% of the mineral titles, period, subject to all kinds of rules, such as doing assessment work. And you can't explore it or do any disturbance on the ground without consultation with First Nations or a permit to do so. But it was unquestioned that you owned it. Now, the way the system works is that once you click on the cell or an area to stake, it goes into a consultation process. So it's been told to me that in some circumstances, the consultation process didn't even start until 4, 5, 6 months after they clicked to stake the land that they wanted. So the consultation process is a big black box. No one knows what's going to happen. A mineral claim is somewhat like a patent. It's very secretive business. If you have an idea for the location of a potential mineral showing, you don't want to tell other people. The same like if you've invented a cure for cancer, you're not going to go and blab it around. You don't want others to know. So there's this element of intellectual property that the government has totally ignored. It's just a bizarre system. So there's no question that this is going to cause people to simply look into other jurisdictions. The United States, Mexico, South America, Africa. I mean, many of these jurisdictions are just crying out for Canadian companies. They're waving their flags. Hey, please come to our country. So in March, there's going to be what's called the PDAC conference. It's the biggest mining conference in Canada. It's huge, 40,000 people. And this conference is populated by almost every country on earth, pitching companies to come there. So it's a competitive industry. So this is no doubt. This is just my opinion. I don't have any data to back it up. There's absolutely no doubt that companies are going to be thinking twice about locating or claims here. So now, the companies that already have claims, all the claims that pre-existed these change in the rules are grandfathered in. So you had a bit of a staking rush occur before the rule change. So most of the projects that are getting funded now are based on claims that were already staked by these companies, so they're not really worried about them. But it does send a signal to the global market that BC seems to be, putting up a red flag, not open for business. Are we or aren't we open for business? So, I talk up a lot about the mineral claim status in various articles we've published on the New Westminster Times, and also I've talked extensively about this on our YouTube channel if people are interested in getting more information.
If you were in charge of mining in BC, what would you do to make BC a mining powerhouse?
Well, the first thing I would do, I would scrap the current what's called the Mineral Claim Consultation Framework. That should be scrapped immediately, and a new system the problem is the BC government stupidly did not appeal a court decision that was awarded to the Gitxaala First Nation about a place called Banks Island. So, unfortunately, because they didn't appeal, the period for appeals has passed. But the system could be set up with kind of a much, much faster expedited system. That's number one. Number two, I would eliminate any veto over any mining project. The application of DRIPA should be repealed immediately, and it should be clarified that mineral claim staking and mineral claims that exist on Crown land, that the decision-making over the environmental regulation process over mines and permits is strictly in the hands of the elected government of the province of BC. Right now, they have all these fuzzy concepts of co-government and government to government. Like, well, there's the First Nations government, and then there's our government. We're going to co-manage this. That should come to an end. There's no way that First Nations can manage something as gigantic as a multi-billion-dollar mining project. What are they just going to hire all of the experts working in Victoria on mining and environmental review and have them work in their offices? It's going to be they're going to be competing for expertise. It's the province, and there's a lawsuit that is proceeding in the courts as we speak to ask that very question. Who is in charge of the environmental review process? That process, it should be clarified, is 100% government. The people, we elect a government, and that government's given the responsibility to put in place infrastructure for overseeing these projects. It is not fair, I would say, even to the First Nations. A lot of the First Nations in this province, there's so many that they're tiny. They don't have any experts or people to review projects. Some of the names that get talked about a lot are like the Tahltan. The Tahltan are a very exceptional group of people. They have capacity and they have a history of mining. It's very uncommon. So now they're being used as the gold standard for everything. Well, look what's happening with the Kamloops First Nation. I talked about this. We've written an article we just published a couple of days ago about Roseanne Casimir's demands and their land claim that covers the entirety of the city of Kamloops. And they're now looking to extend their claim and looking for what she called a 50% revenue model, and they want to include the Highland Valley copper mine. So this veto over projects, that should immediately end. That cannot stand. It will be a disaster. And basically, nobody knows when there's going to be an election in BC, but the direction that EB is taking the province is the wrong direction. And that they should be voted out. And this is the problem with BC politics, is that the NDP just have a very, very efficient election campaigning machine, and they're always underestimated. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Those would be two key things to do. Is the veto has to be clarified. Do they have a veto? No. That's the way things have been. All the projects that are kind of on deck and ready to go forward, they've all been developed, and the investors have ponied up all the money based on a different set of rules. So EB has effectively moved the goalposts on everybody. It says, well, now you want to go into production. Well, the goalposts are way over here. Well, the goalposts should be put back where they were, so that the investors who put the money in are not facing a whole new set of risk factors, and that, in business, people use the expression changing the deal. It's just not honorable to change the deal once people have ponied up the money and incurred the risk to bring these projects to fruition, to change the deal. That's what's happened. And that changing of the deal needs to be undone.
David, where can our listeners follow you and what you're doing?
Well, they can go to our website, newwesttimes.com, and subscribe to our newsletter. They can also follow us on YouTube. Just type the New Westminster Times in there. You'll find our channel. And they can follow us on X, at New West Times. We have a growing following. We cover not just mining and the resource business, what we cover. We have a number of high-profile contributors, such as somebody named Amy Ham. She was the nurse that was fired from her job for standing up for biological reality and pushing back on things like biological man and women's sport. She's been canceled. So if there's been people canceled, we have them there. So we give them a platform to share their information. So they can follow us there. And I really appreciate the time to speak to your audience. And they can, hopefully, they can reach out and follow what we're doing.
David, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
My guest has been David Brett, founder of the New Westminster Times. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark, Eric Hadik, and David Brett. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions for the show or for any of our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen.